I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. Lawmakers here in Berlin have just approved a controversial new law extending the power of the German government to limit social contacts as part of the fight against the coronavirus. Outside Parliament, police turned water cannon against protesters opposed to lockdown restrictions, many of whom had ignored calls to wear masks. The crowd included far-right groups, conspiracy theorists and COVID-19 deniers. There were more than 100 arrests, and critics say the changes infringed civil liberties and were rushed through Parliament. We can get more from DW political correspondent Simon Young. Welcome, Simon. Let's start with today's protests. So what happened?
Yeah, Phil, it's been a pretty noisy afternoon in the centre of Berlin with, as you mentioned, several thousand protesters, some of them pretty angry, some of them throwing bottles at police who responded with water cannon. There was a big police presence again in and around the Parliament and the Brandenburg Gate and so on. The diverse groups of people, as you said, some of them opposed to all sort of corona measures, others saying that what they're really worried about is the erosion of civil liberties. But the police ended this demonstration after a couple of hours, partly because people weren't wearing masks or socially distancing, but a lot of the protesters were still hanging round, blocking traffic just a short distance away from where the politicians were discussing legislation about coronavirus. So I think that's what's led to some of these agitated scenes in Berlin today.
Right, well, let's take a closer look at the legislation you've just described, which Parliament has now approved.
Before 2020, who could have imagined Germans might ever be forced by law to cover their faces? Just one instance of how lawmakers did not foresee the extent and detail of many measures introduced this year. Some, such as bans on people from certain regions staying in hotels, were overturned by the courts. The new law aims to clarify the rules limiting contacts between people, including the closure of cafes, bars and restaurants. It also provides a new basis for police to enforce distancing rules and the mask requirement, and makes clear under what circumstances schools and kindergartens might be shut. For politicians, this is about ensuring public support and keeping Parliament in the loop. In all these health protection measures, which are going to be hard over the coming months, we have to take people with us. We can't just impose them by decree. It can only be done with dialogue. The new law should mean events such as demonstrations can only be banned if experts agree such a move is proportionate. But already, plenty of people are saying such legislation cuts too deep into basic freedoms, and its aims are insufficiently clear.
Let's talk more about those objections then, Simon, because on the face of it, this sounds like this new law is just clarifying the current situation. So what are demonstrators so angry about?
I think for a lot of people, it's really about letting the politicians know that they are hurting. And of course, people are suffering as elsewhere, particularly business owners or people who've had to rearrange their lives. And obviously, families have been heavily disrupted. But a lot of these hardcore protesters are real corona skeptics. There may be some with links to the far right. And as far as this piece of legislation is concerned, it doesn't actually prescribe any specific measures that the government has to take. It just puts any measures that they do take on a more solid legal footing. So from the government's point of view, they would say this is democracy in action.
So briefly then, Simon, how much support do these measures have amongst the public?
Well, the lockdown that Germany is in at the moment has got very significant support. About 54%, anyway, over half of Germans say they think the measures that are in place now, the limited lockdowns, are sufficient and appropriate to deal with the virus. Indeed, 18% say they don't think the measures go far enough. So there's a lot of support, and I think that's been pretty solid throughout the last 8 months since we've seen the government having to take some extreme measures to deal with the pandemic.
All right, Simon, thank you. Simon Young.